Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You are on the Steady Coach. And today we're going to be talking about how to get started on your recovery from medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms if you have 24/7 constant symptoms, particularly if you're really debilitated. But I think you'll also find this video helpful if your symptoms are 24/7 and mild. And even if you don't have 24/7 symptoms, this video probably will still have some good ideas for you that you can integrate into your recovery process. I'm making this video because as of right now, I have hundreds of videos on my channel about how to approach chronic dizziness recovery. And if you're here with PPPD, MDDS, vestibular migraine, post-concussion syndrome, cervicogenic dizziness, or other vague sort of medical diagnoses that don't really explain why your symptoms are happening, then it can be almost impossible to sift through all those and figure out how to make them work. And I've also seen that people with 24/7 symptoms often have some very specific questions about why this still applies to them and also how to operationalize the recovery and where the free course fits into all of this. So we're going to address all of that today. Why 24/7 symptoms are totally par for the course. In other words, can be very normal for neural circuit dizziness, how this fits into the neural circuit dizziness recovery paradigm if you don't notice fluctuations or changes in symptoms. And then finally, just some step-by-step ideas on how to actually implement this process if you have 24/7 or constant debilitating symptoms, or again, milder symptoms if that's what you have. So first of all, normalizing the idea that many people who come to my channel with any of the diagnoses I mentioned, or just medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms, have symptoms that are constant. And one of the first questions people ask, especially if they've seen a bunch of my other videos, is, hang on a second, Yonit, you say that stress drives symptoms. Does that mean that I'm stressed out 24/7? And why is it that I still feel really awful whether I'm anxious or calm? My symptoms just don't change in relation to my mood. Does this mean that there's something physically wrong with me or that this approach won't work? At least half of you show up to my channel with constant symptoms. You are in the right place. And I'm going to re-explain the basic concepts of neural circuit dizziness in a way that helps you understand why this makes sense for constant symptoms as well. To understand why you have medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms, you need to understand that there are two processes that are going wrong in your brain. That may sound scary, but what I'm talking about here are software issues. They're ways your brain processes information. They're not physical problems or tissue damage in your brain. Software problems are reversible because our brains are constantly updating their software in terms of how they process information. So right now, your brain is making errors in how it's processing two things. The first thing that it's making errors with is how it's predicting sensory information. The way that we perceive the world around us is accomplished through something called predictive coding. This means that our brains don't just passively take in information from our senses and then pop out an explanation or a meaning. It means that our brains actively predict what might happen, and then they just compare the sensory information we're getting from the outside to its expectations or predictions, and then based on that comparison, it pops out a meaning. Why would brains do this? Because it's way more efficient than having to build it from scratch each time. A really simple metaphor I've used recently is it's kind of like if you were cooking from a recipe that you knew really, really well and had made 100 times, and you were just making a small variation on that recipe. You could whip that up in just a few minutes. Compare that to how efficient it would be if you were cooking from a brand new recipe that you had never seen before with brand new ingredients that maybe you had to go to the grocery store to buy, and then you had to go through the cookbook step by step to make the recipe. Obviously, that would be a much less efficient process. Our brains really like efficiency, so they use predictive coding to determine what's going on in our environment. The problem with predictive coding is it can make mistakes. And when your brain is not doing a good job of understanding the information coming in from your eyes, ears, and sense of touch, those are the components of the balance system. If it makes errors with one or more of those, and it's just not putting them together correctly, and then it compares its predictions, which are wrong, to the information it's getting from your senses, that means you will feel dizzy. Dizziness is a prediction error. The second process that's going wrong when you have neural circuit dizziness is in your stress response to perceived threat or danger. In other words, when you have neural circuit dizziness, your brain is extra sensitive to something it's perceiving as threatening. It misinterprets information from the outside, specific circumstances, or everything in your life as a dangerous thing. It misinterprets sensory information, which, to remind you, is always coming in, as a dangerous thing. And then combine that with predictive coding errors, where your brain is not making good sense of what's coming in from the outside, and you end up with dizziness and an overactive threat response system. What this ends up doing is you're not only dizzy, but your brain is really focused on the dizziness and also really worried about making sure that you notice it. So it cranks the volume up, saying, hey, did you notice that I'm dizzy? This is really dangerous. Really notice this. Unfortunately, that creates a lot of fear and anxiety, which makes the symptoms of dizziness worse as well. And now we have a cycle, the chronic dizziness cycle, that leads to chronic symptoms. Now, fear and anxiety are one driver of this cycle, but other things in your life can also increase that threat response system sensitivity. So it's not just in response to symptoms or in response to physical triggers. It can also be in response to life circumstances or unresolved traumatic experiences or just strong feelings or relationship problems or long patterns of treating yourself really poorly. None of these things in and of themselves are going to make someone dizzy. But when the dizziness is here, and we already have this fear and anxiety cycle going, and then we also have these enormous amounts of stress feeding into the cycle gets stronger and it kind of gets stuck. That's what 24/7 or constant symptoms means. It doesn't mean that you're constantly responding poorly to symptoms. It doesn't mean you're constantly dealing with tons of stress in every moment. It means that your brain has basically gotten to the point where it's so sensitive to danger, it is predicting danger and dizziness all the time. Now, at some point in the recovery process, you are going to be looking at how these other stressors are feeding into the cycle. For some people, that's a non-negotiable part of recovery. But when you have constant symptoms, especially when they're really debilitating, that time may not be now. So I'm going to give you advice now on how to structure your day and how to structure your recovery in general. Just know that none of these are hard and fast rules, and I really encourage you to approach everything that I'm saying today in the spirit of a little bit of experimentation to figure out what's actually going to work best for you. Step number one when you have constant symptoms is to figure out your baseline level of activity. And I'm talking about on the bad days, not the good days. Especially if you're really debilitated, I want you to come up with a list of the activities that you do and can do on your bad days and structure a schedule around that. Now, for those of you who've seen my other videos, this may be a radically different message from the ones that you're hearing in many of my other content. And I totally acknowledge that. But this is a really good way to start when you have constant symptoms, especially when they're debilitating, because ultimately our goal in breaking that chronic dizziness cycle is to create some kind of safety. If we can stop your brain from predicting danger, it will help break that cycle that's keeping symptoms loud and keeping them going. Nervous systems love structure because they love certainty. Think about the last time you had a boss or professor or family member who was just kind of unclear about his or her expectations and how uncomfortable that felt. When you have a clear schedule of things that you need to do and you can achieve them consistently on bad days and on good days, giving your brain this very clear pattern of expectations of what you're going to do and that those things are safe, it's going to create a lot of safety and take a lot of the uncertainty out of the picture for your nervous system. And it's also going to take a lot of the mental agony out of it when you're debilitated and constantly trying to second guess what you should be doing next. So for the next few weeks, I want you to create that schedule, try to be a B- student, and know that things aren't going to exactly happen at the same time each day, but try to be as consistent as you can with your routine, whether your day is good or bad, and set that bar appropriately. Do not, at this point in the game, set the bar so high that you can't achieve it on a bad day. It may be as little as sitting up in bed for some of you. It may be as little as walking to the front door for some of you. That is okay. We start there. The second thing I want you to do is start building into that schedule some blocks of time in which you deliberately respond to symptoms differently. The most useful tool for this is something like somatic tracking. I will link to some somatic tracking exercises in the video description below, but it can be as simple as, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to set an alarm on my phone or on my watch. I am going to allow the symptoms to happen and try to be a little bit more neutral about them. Try to use a little bit of different self-talk while I'm concentrating on this task. And for most people, this may mean setting those kinds of blocks in 3 times a day. For some of you, it may be more beneficial to do it 5 times a day. And that's something over time you're going to need less and less structure to as you have more activities to fill up your day. So the rule of thumb here is the more activities you have on your schedule, the more things you're able to do throughout your day, the less time I want you spending on deliberately noticing symptoms. But it is a practice that's really helpful. So again, starting from maybe 1 to 3 times a day or more than that if you're not able to do much else right now. Step 3 is to start taking the free course. I will link to that in the video description. You can find it on my website, thesteadycoach.com/free-course. It is completely free. And here's why I'm suggesting doing this in step 3. Because now you've already established a plan of action. You are reading and going through the course and watching the videos for the purposes of gathering more information and learning more tools for recovery. You already have an action plan. So the free course isn't there to tell you 15 new things to do. It's to teach you slowly but surely more techniques that you might be able to use and to inform you of how things like emotions and stress are things that you're going to want to address at a later point in your recovery process. You are not trying to fix yourself right now, as tempting as that may be. I know when you feel this way, that is going to be a very high priority and your biggest impulse, and I want you to resist that. The purpose of the free course right now for you is not to fix you, it's to inform you and slowly but surely give you the information that you need to start getting better and better. Step number 4, instead of thinking about things to take away, oh, I need to stop my anxiety and fear, oh, I need to get rid of my trauma or feel my feelings. These are all things that you might have some impression about from the course. None of those things at first. I want you to think about giving yourself more rather than taking away something. Where can you give yourself more in your life to help increase that nervous system safety? This can be things that are very, very simple and small. And I want you to just start by noticing your baseline, how you talk to yourself, how you talk about yourself, and you can start from very, very small things. How do you talk to yourself when you're struggling with symptoms? Do you blame yourself and shame yourself for being debilitated or not being able to work, for not being able to participate in your life the way you want to? You can start by just changing the self-talk, talking to yourself more kindly, using little mantra type statements. This is just a brain error. I'm strong and can handle this. There's nothing wrong with me. You can even sing these mantras to yourself. And I've often had people create little tunes for themselves to say some of these words of safety, because again, we're not trying to communicate with a logical, rational part of your brain. Many times people know that they have a lot of fear and anxiety and want to stop feeling fear and anxiety. We can't talk ourselves out of having feelings, but sometimes using very brief phrases, singing to ourselves, feeling kind feelings toward ourselves, that has a faster and better effect on the nervous system at that deeper level where the anxiety and fear are happening. And when you've gone through these steps, what will happen is over time, you'll be able to build in a little bit more activity. You'll understand neural circuit dizziness. You'll feel like you have a little bit more agency about what you can do with your symptoms, even when they're high and unrelenting. And at that point, that's when some of the introspective work becomes useful. That's when things like journaling, when trying to feel your emotions, when trying to notice in the dips. So even people who have 24/7 symptoms have ups and downs usually. You might start to notice when some of these things may have a relationship to stress, may have a relationship to emotions. And I want to be clear, not everyone notices those things. So these are things that you can start practicing looking for once you have a little bit more sense of power and agency over what's going on in your life with the symptoms. I hope that gives you some idea of how to get started. And again, so much of this is covered in more detail in my free course. But this video is particularly tailored to you in the circumstances you're in. So it is my biggest hope that this helps push you forward out of full-on debilitating symptoms all the time so that you can start to make progress like you see many of the other people here in the comments section doing. I look forward to your questions and comments. You can drop them below. Please like this video, share, please subscribe to my channel. All these things help me reach more people, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.